straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily.
Were you aware that he texted his friend that he talked to his dad about having a mental breakdown, and that he texted his friend that his dad said, "Suck it up"?
New details revealed about the relationship between the accused Oxford High School shooter and his parents. And we hear from the defendant for the first time in the movie theater murder trial.
I was scared. This guy was completely out of control. Didn't seem to be acting rational.
Plus, the deadly Rust shooting. We hear from the family of victim Helena Hutchins for the first time.
Are we really supposed to feel bad about you, Mr. Baldwin?
But first, the death of Breonna Taylor.
He said that she was the one that shot at us, and that she was dead in the courtroom.
To Law and Crime Daily, I'm Brian Ross, in for Brian Buckmeyer, who's in Kentucky, covering the trial of former police officer Brett Hankison. And with me here in New York is co-host Terry Austin. And we begin with a closer look now at the days following the shooting death of Breonna Taylor. On Thursday, jurors were shown the recorded police interview of defendant Brett Hankison. Hankison is not charged in the killing of Breonna Taylor, but instead faces charges of wanton endangerment for firing shots through Taylor's apartment into a unit behind hers. In March 2020, 3 officers executed a no-knock warrant to Taylor's apartment. Her boyfriend, believing the officers were intruders, fired shots at them. The officers fired back, and Taylor was killed in that crossfire. Former Louisville police officer John Mattingly, who assisted Hankison in the raid, was also shot. On Tuesday, jurors were shown video of Hankison's police interview, recorded just 12 days after the shooting.
I didn't know if John was down and they couldn't get his body out, or he was, that all I could hear was the firing. I saw the flashes. I thought they were just being executed because I knew they were helping John. Because John said, "I'm hit, I'm down," and the gunfire intensified. So I was almost under the impression at the time that they were either all getting sprayed with bullets, or as they were trying to move him out of that breezeway, he was shooting at us through the wall, or them, because I now had a shot, or I now had my only option was to return fire, and I did that to the muzzle flashes. And I want to be specific about this. I had already seen where the threat was. I saw where he was positioned in the hallway. So when I made that corner and I heard and saw what I just described, the muzzle flashes, I returned fire at the angle that I believed him to still be shooting from, because I could still see those muzzle flashes and hear it, and the fire increased like almost like an automatic type weapon, or what in my mind was an automatic weapon.
Law and Crime Daily host Brian Buckmeyer joins us now live in Louisville, Kentucky. And Brian, day 2 marked even more commotion in the courtroom.
Absolutely. Brian, for the second day in a row, Breonna Taylor's family were asked to leave the courtroom for wearing shirts and jackets depicting Taylor's photo. On Thursday, Breonna Taylor's mother, Tamika Palmer, was asked to leave for wearing this jacket that reads, "Breonna Taylor, say her name." She was escorted out of the courthouse entirely. Yesterday, Taylor's sister, Janiyah Palmer, was asked to leave for wearing a shirt that said, quote, "Arrest the cops who killed Breonna Taylor." Taylor's family members tell me how it all went down. They were asked to step out of the court. They waited outside. The sheriffs somewhat poked the picture of Taylor on her chest, that being Tamika Palmer's chest, saying that this was the issue, but didn't really give a full explanation. More sheriffs came up to the courtroom and escorted Palmer, her daughter, and her friend outside of the building. They told me they'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow, the jury is expected to be at the home of Breonna Taylor. Law and Crime Daily will be there for gavel-to-gavel coverage, not only inside the court, but also outside.
And joining us now is co-host Terry Austin and legal analyst Kirk Nerney. Kirk, Hankison isn't charged with Breonna Taylor's death, but he is the only officer involved in the raid who faces criminal charges. Do you think we'll ever expect to see the other 2 officers charged in any way?
Well, you know, Brian, the evidence in this case doesn't really advance that possibility. We heard that the police knocked instead of having a no-knock warrant, and we heard that they were fired upon and they returned fire. So that in and of itself does not enhance that possibility. But of course, the evidence in this case is far from complete. And one of the key aspects of answering your question, I think, might be the testimony of Mr. Hankison himself, because we don't know what he's going to say, and that could alter things. That could alter the possibility of that, in kind of the same way we saw Mr. Durst take the stand in California and wind up being charged in New York. So that possibility always exists, but it's just going to depend on what Mr. Hankison has to say should he take the stand.
Right. And Terry Austin, during Brett Hankinson's interview following the shooting, he became emotional at one point. What's the impact, you think, from that on the jury?
Oh, I think it's going to have a significant impact on that jury. It was powerful testimony. It was conducted right after the incident, so his memory was fresh. He got emotional when they started talking about his partner, Officer Mattingly, who actually was injured during the incident. And so I think that they're going to look at that and recognize he is feeling something for Mattingly. Interestingly enough, the judge called him to a sidebar, told the defense, look, move on. This is not about Mattingly. It's about Hankison, and go to the next issue. So they did.
And Brian, what's your take on the police interrogation video shown to jurors? Hankinson mentioned Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, had an AR-15 rifle.
Yeah, that was pretty peculiar. We were seeing a lot of the jurors really focus on the edge of their seat. A number of them are writing notes, so they're definitely paying attention. That point about the AR-15 came up through cross-examination, redirect, and recross, in the sense that no long rifle, no AR-15 was found at the location, and no shell casing for an AR-15 or a type of gun like that was there. So while Brett Hankison took the steps that may have been proper for that type of gun at a location where someone's shooting it, it appears that his observation of what occurred was completely false. It's going to be interesting to see how either side, the prosecution or the defense, argues that. But right now, it seems like the prosecution has a bit of the upper leg on that issue.
All right, thank you, Brian Buckmeyer in Louisville for us tonight. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, 8 years after a deadly movie theater shooting, accused murderer Curtis Reeves takes the stand in his own defense. But first, the deadly Rust shooting. The family of victim Helena Hutchins speaks out and points the finger at Alan Baldwin.
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law and Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law and Crime Network with YouTubeTV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTubeTV today and then locate Law and Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law and Crime every day with YouTubeTV. We put you in the jury box.
And welcome back. For the first time, we're hearing from the husband of cinematographer Helena Hutchins, who was shot and killed by Alec Baldwin on a movie set last year. Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy is here with what Matt Hutchins is saying about the death of his wife. Anjanette?
Brian, Matt Hutchins is suing Alec Baldwin and others for the death of his wife, Helena. That wrongful death lawsuit claims that at least 15 industry standards were violated that day when Alec Baldwin shot and killed Helena Hutchins, and it was all happening on the set of that movie, Rust. Hutchins spoke for the first time publicly in an interview with the Today Show on NBC. An animation of a recreation of that shooting was released by Hutchins's lawyer, showing what they believe happened and how this whole thing transpired. Baldwin has said he was told the gun was safe after the assistant director handed it to him, but Baldwin did not check the weapon himself. Matt Hutchins talked about losing his wife, safety concerns on the set, and Alec Baldwin's claim that he didn't pull the trigger and is not at fault for what happened.
I feel that someone is responsible for what happened, and I can't say who that is, but I know it's not me.
But watching him, I just felt so angry. Just so angry to see him talk about her death so publicly in such a detailed way, and then to not accept any responsibility after having just described killing her.
He said, essentially, he felt grief but no guilt.
Almost sounds like he was the victim.
Now, after Matt Hutchins filed that wrongful death lawsuit against Alec Baldwin and many others involved in this film, Baldwin's attorney issued a lengthy statement saying that actors should be able to rely on armorers and assistant directors to ensure that the weapons on the set are safe. That armorer and assistant director are also named in the lawsuit. Brian.
Thanks, Anjanette. Kurt Nurmi, Baldwin has said he did not pull the trigger of the gun and that he, as you heard, is not responsible. If all of that was true, would he still be found liable for the shooting?
Well, we talk about civil liability, certainly, Brian, but if you're asking specifically about criminal liability, I still think there's a possibility because we have negligence and reckless standards. So did he do anything that was negligent or reckless with the gun when he was doing this quick draw procedure that led to Mitchell Hutchinson's death? So that's what's going to have to be determined. But there's so many layers of this that I think it's going to be hard to prosecute because was it reasonable for him to rely on the fact that there wasn't live ammo? All questions like that have to be answered before I think any prosecuting agency could go forward and seriously charge Mr. Baldwin.
Right, and Terry Austin, we've seen Baldwin and now Hutchins speak to the press. The battle over the media narrative is on, but that's only one thing. How does that weigh on what happens ultimately in court?
Generally, it is not a good idea, Brian, to speak to the press, and that's whether you have a pending civil litigation like we have here with the wrongful death, or whether you have a potential criminal liability here. You could say something in the press where you're making an admission or you misstate a fact, and it will be held against you. And here we saw Baldwin denied responsibility, and that got the family, that got Matt Hutchins upset. And so now, as far as the civil case is concerned, if in fact they wanted to settle, it will be more difficult and it will not be amicable. And frankly, I don't think either one of them should be in the press trying the case.
And Anjanette, what is the status of the criminal investigation into Helena Hutchins' death?
Well, Brian, the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office is investigating the shooting to determine exactly what happened, how that live ammunition actually made it onto the set, because we've heard so many times that live ammo shouldn't be anywhere near a movie set. So the investigation is well underway. There was a search warrant executed on Alec Baldwin's phone, and we know that that material has been turned over to the Sheriff's Office. So we're waiting to see what recommendations the Sheriff's Office makes to the district attorney, because they will eventually turn that investigation over to the DA, who will make the final decision on whether any charges will be pursued.
Thanks, Anjanette. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, the parents of the accused Oxford High School shooter, Ethan Crumbley, are back in court. Plus, accused murderer Curtis Reeves takes the stand in his own defense. Hear the defendant's testimony. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. The defense rests its case in the trial of former police captain Curtis Reeves, and all eyes were on the witness stand Thursday as he testified in his own behalf for allegedly shooting and killing a fellow moviegoer in a theater 8 years ago. Reeves began his testimony talking about his background, including military experience, his former training as a Tampa police recruit, and working with weapons. This went on for nearly an hour and a half. Reeves' attorney then moved on to ask about the day of the shooting, January 13th, 2014. Reeves faces second-degree murder charges for the shooting death of Chad Olson after apparently getting frustrated with him being on his cell phone during the movie previews. A few witnesses have testified Olson threw popcorn at Reeves. Reeves says Olson threw a cell phone at him and was coming at him over the row of seats in front of him. That's when he says he had no alternative, so he pulled out his gun and shot Olson, he says, in self-defense.
I was scared. This guy was completely out of control. Didn't seem to be acting rational. I was so scared until I was not sure exactly where he was, but I knew he was attacking me.
So, Kirk Newman, do you think Reeves taking the stand helped him or hurt him?
Well, you know, I think it could only have hurt him at that point. I knew that he was the kind of guy that had the ego that he would want to take the stand. And I know he's been probably sitting in his home on house arrest for 8 years waiting for this moment. But given all the defense case we saw before, Brian, we saw a lot of experts talk about what he went through. We saw reenactments. We saw all kinds of, we heard his interview tape played. So there was really no reason for him to take the stand. And it really, I think, only could hurt him when on cross-examination. And one of the things I was watching when I was watching this cross-examination is his body language. He came across angry, but he also came across pretty ambulatory. You know, the prosecutor, I think, did something smart. He had him get up, move around to show that this was not the completely feeble old man, especially when we go back 8 years ago that the medical experts, and he was claiming himself to be.
Right. Terry, Reeves spent a significant amount of his time discussing his career as a police officer. What do you think was the defense strategy in going into his law enforcement background?
Well, I think the defense was trying to show, look, this man is old. He's got physical conditions that really make him more vulnerable. And the fact that he was a police officer means he knows about dangers. He knows that people carry weapons. He knows that they could use their fists. And this is why we have this situation where he overreacted and he shot. Now, they're trying to say it wasn't an overreaction, but clearly I agree with Kirk. This is an overreaction, and I think the jury sees that.
All right, Terry and Kirk, thank you very much. Now, a program note coming up this week on Brian Ross Investigates, baseball blues. The sport has been rocked by a new drug scandal, all coming to light now following the overdose death of a Los Angeles Angel pitcher, Tyler Skaggs, and testimony in court about widespread use of drugs among other players.
Unfortunately, what it did at a time when nobody's playing baseball or planning to play baseball is it reignited memories of the cocaine scandals of the 70s or the Pittsburgh Pirates. And it pointed up exactly what is the matter with Major League Baseball right now. They're always behind in fixing problems that they should have addressed beforehand.
That's coming up this week on Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network. When we come back, we head to Michigan for day 2 of Jennifer and James Crumbley's preliminary hearing. The newest details revealed by prosecutors about the days leading up to the deadly Oxford high school shooting. And welcome back. A big development in Minneapolis Thursday night. All 3 ex-officers were found guilty in federal court in connection to the death of George Floyd. Tu Tao, Thomas Lane, and J. Alexander King were found guilty of violating George Floyd's rights in May of 2020. Federal jurors deliberated for about 13 hours. Our legal analyst will dig deeper into that conviction on the next episode of Law and Crime Daily. And just days after the accused Oxford high school shooter appears in court himself, a preliminary hearing for his parents back in session. Jennifer and James Crumbley are charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter following the shooting spree at Oxford High School last November. Prosecutors say their son, 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley, opened fire at the school, killing 4 students and injuring others. Prosecutors say parents Jennifer and James Crumbley gifted their son the weapon that was used in the school shooting and ignored the multiple warning signs from the school, including disturbing drawings made by Ethan and reports that he kept a bird's head in a jar. On Thursday, prosecutors described how both parents acted when Ethan told them he suffered a mental breakdown. They verified the Oxford High School counselor was not aware of these conversations.
Were you aware that Ethan had texted his mom about seeing demons?
No.
Were you aware that he texted his mom about things flying off shelves?
No.
Were you aware that he had asked several times to see a therapist?
No.
Were you aware that he thought he was having a mental breakdown at some point?
No.
Were you aware that Ethan had texted his friend that he talked to his mom about getting help and she laughed at him?
Objection. I don't believe that text has come in as evidence.
Well,
There is not that the fact that mom laughed at him about therapy is not a part of the evidence in this case.
were you aware that he texted his friend that he talked to his dad about having a mental breakdown, and that he texted his friend that his dad said, suck it up.
No.
15-year-old Ethan Crumbley faces charges of terrorism and first-degree murder. A Michigan judge has until next week to decide whether Ethan will be relocated to a children's village or stay put in the Oakland County Jail for adults. So Kirk, the judge, is now bound over the parents for trial. After that hearing, the Crumbleys were bound over. Does that change the preliminary hearing and gives us kind of a preview of what we're going to see at the trial?
You're right, Brian. It is a great preview, but keep in mind when this case gets in front of a jury, that jury might very be made up of parents who probably would admit they're not perfect parents themselves. So when the state moves forward with this case, they're going to have to show extreme, tangible signs that were neglected by both Jennifer and James Crumbley in order to make their case, in order to prove that this was so outrageous that this legal leap that the state wants to take in this novel charge is one that they should find him guilty for. And that's going to require a lot of tangible evidence, but like, as you said, ignoring all that tangible evidence and then putting a weapon capable of killing individuals in his hand despite all those signs. That will earn him a conviction.
And Terry, this case is making legal news in part because of the novel aspect of the parents being charged with a crime. Some think that's what should happen more often in these cases.
Well, I think you have people on both sides of that issue, Brian, people who think that the parents should be responsible, but only in situations that are so extreme like this case. I think the prosecution is absolutely right to bring 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter against the Crumbleys, because here you can see that there is some criminal negligence here. There's no question they bought the gun. They knew about the mental illness. They failed to lock up the gun. They did nothing when they heard about the trouble the child was having. So I think this case is the case to do that.
All right, Terry and Kirk, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily.